You're not safe in this world. We are in a completely different place than we were even 10 years ago. We are in a lawless place moving towards Mad Max quicker than you think. And the thing about chaos is it spreads like a virus, and it spreads geometrically, not arithmetically. And it's growing by the day. I want to play this video for you. I want to warn you in advance. This is the most disturbing one yet. You've probably seen it, but I want you to see it again. It's some guy in Chicago. He's walking down an alley in the middle of the day, but I want you to listen. The audio, listen on Apple or Spotify, the audio is almost as powerful for all the wrong reasons. I want you to notice that these guys don't want to mug this guy. They want to hurt this guy. They're out there, everywhere. Wolves are everywhere. You want to be a sheep or you want to be a sheepdog?
Drama. No. I hope no drama. I mean, I got new people, but that's a daily with what I dealt with last night. That's a daily. I don't know if I could do it for a whole shift. 2 hours is more than enough.
My fellow Americans, the southern border invasion is getting even worse. Governor Greg Abbott has declared an invasion is happening. Also, Texas Governor Greg Abbott accuses the Biden administration of cutting razor wire at the border, opening the floodgates. Something is happening on purpose. Welcome back to the JP Reacts channel, my beautiful freedom-loving friends, where we like to call out the lies, hypocrisy, and corruption of tyrants, shine the light of awareness on woke absurdities, and highlight the amazing work of other freedom fighters. We've had a problem.
Hello, Joko.
It's only gotten worse with the Biden administration. In the Biden administration, welcome to 1984, they continually say, hey, we got a secure border. We're securing the border. But they're literally doing things like cutting the razor wire that Texas sets up to keep illegals out. That's like you paying for a security company, because indeed you are paying for a security company. It's called the government, the Biden administration. They are being paid by you and I, if you pay taxes. And it's like, okay, you're paying a security company, come secure my home. They're like, yeah, not a problem. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take your front door off the hinges. We're just going to remove that, and we've just secured your home. You're like, well, I think you actually made my home the opposite of secure. You've just made it easier for people to enter. They're like, no. We made it more secure. It's what 1984 is doublespeak. The opposite of what they say is what they're actually doing. Let's take a look at some of these headlines. Texas Governor Greg Abbott accuses the Biden administration of cutting razor wire at the border, opening the floodgates. So this is the Biden administration opening the border on purpose, making the flow of illegal immigrants into our country more pervasive, more invasive, making the situation much worse. Pausing there for a second. First off, I want to say I have compassion for genuine families who are in what Trump might call a poop hole of a country like Venezuela, wanting to leave their country and, of course, seek refuge in America. I have compassion for that. If I was them, I would want to do the same thing for my family. The problem is you can't let everybody in all the time. There's an immigration process that is designed to, one, keep our country beautiful, free, secure, but also keep out some of the people who are taking advantage of the open border. Drug cartels, human trafficking cartels, dangerous criminals. They're now able to literally walk in. No passport control, no control, just if you got a pair of hiking boots, come on in. Here you go. That's the problem. The dangerous people that are just flooding into our
Dude, don't stop.
Another headline, the border was secured.
Ah.
U.S. officials rips the Biden administration for ordering agents to cut fences. Ordering agents to cut fences. I want to show you a picture of something here in a second. Here on this cf.org website. Never been on here before, so I'm not
Fucking idiot.
But here's a picture. This is a border wall. Ever hear of a president who wanted to build a wall? Well, he built some wall, that's for sure. And here the gates of the wall.
They go no left turn there.
And it's being said the Biden administration, not only have they cut the razor wire fences, they've come out and they've opened these gates. Now, unfortunately, they're not just easy to close. They have opened the gates, so they've said they're welding the gates open. But leave it to the fact checkers to tell you that you're not seeing what's in front of you. Checkyourfacts.com. Man, I don't know about you. I am ready to trust the fact checkers. Let's see what they say. They're checking this fact, okay? A video shared on social media purports that the United States border wall gates have been opened by the Biden administration. Oh my gosh, we got a fact check. Tell us what's not true about that, fact checkers. And I'll show you the video in a second. But first, the verdict on that claim that the open gates that we saw, it's being said the Biden administration opened these gates. We know the governors want these gates closed. So it makes sense that the Biden administration would open the gates. So these open gates that you saw, the verdict, it's misleading. The gates are open for monsoon season in Arizona to avoid water damage. Cool. This wall that has open slats, presumably not big enough for a human body to fit through, these open slats that would allow water to flow through to probably protect against monsoon season. Yeah, we had to open all the doors too because those open slats for the water to flow through. Water wasn't going to flow through that, so we had to monsoon season, everybody. That's why we did it. Do you think they believe that? Cool.
Monsoon season in Arizona.
So here's the video. This is a rather intriguing video, just showing open doors, showing how they're pretty well solidified open. So thank you, fact checkers, for letting us know the Biden administration that is routinely working hard to keep the border open while saying they're securing the border. Take the door off your front house. It'll be more secure. Thank you for paying us. You're a security company. This is open because of monsoon season. Okay. And Texas Governor Greg Abbott has declared an invasion at the southern border. And he wrote a letter to his honorable presidency, Joseph R. Biden. And Greg Abbott posted that.
Be right back.
On Twitter. Abbott's Twitter post says, I officially declared an invasion at our border because of Biden's policies. We deployed the Texas National Guard, DPS, and local law enforcement. We are building a border wall, razor wire, and marine wires. We are also repelling migrants. The marine barriers. You've probably seen pictures of those kind of flotation barriers in I think it's like the Rio Grande River or El Paso River, maybe both. I might have the names completely wrong. You've probably seen the pictures. Well, the Biden administration has sued Texas to take those down, suing them, saying like, it's obstructing the natural navigation of waterways. Yeah, that's why we put them up, to obstruct navigating the waterways, to secure our border. And the Biden administration, if they're not cutting razor wire, if they're not welding border gates open, they're suing Texas to take down water border barriers. Some would speculate the Biden administration and the people running his administration are intentionally unsecuring the border as a way of destroying the American way. Now, I would say I 100% agree with that. Doing my own thinking, looking at the evidence that I've seen, not outsourcing my perspective to the trusted fact checkers, it absolutely looks to me there is no other explanation other than it looks like the Biden administration is intentionally opening our border. The only other thing left is to speculate about why. My speculation, and I don't know that this is true, but it's my speculation, the Biden administration and the people who run his administration, hello deep state, they want to weaken our country. They want to destroy the American way of life. To destroy a country, it's Marxism 101. Amongst other things, one of the steps to do is you have to open borders. Eliminate secure borders, open borders. That's what's happening, I speculate, because there's a deeper, nefarious agenda to destroy the American way of life. And if this is true, then I would say that the Biden administration is called terrorist. If that's true, that would make him and his colleagues terrorists.
The chopper, unindoctrinated.
That are all speculative, but they're strong accusations based on absolutely absurd activities of the Biden administration, opening our border, record number of illegals crossing, and amongst those, there are plenty of dangerous criminals. I think this is one of those issues. It's been ongoing in the Biden administration. It's not case closed. I think it would be a mistake to let that get out of sight, out of mind. It's one of those issues that I think is very important to stay very aware on what's happening on, because truly the American way of life depends on it. With that said, my freedom-loving friend, thank you for watching this video. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Before I go, as you might have guessed, I do have a message for you. Hi, human being alive, I like it. I mean, it was certainly better before the globalists threw the whole pandemic at us, but all things considered, it's not bad. It's better than being dead. I like being alive. And how much do you trust doctors and hospitals right now? Yeah, same for me. That's where the wellness company's emergency medical kit comes in. Awake doctors like Dr. Peter McCullough started the wellness company to create real change in healthcare. And part of that change is making sure you get to take control of your health. They offer a wide variety of services like telehealth and naturally formulated supplements to help you with lingering effects of you know what. And most recently, they launched the Emergency Medical Kit, which contains 8 potentially life-saving medications that you might want to have on hand. And I'll tell you, some of these medications are hard to get for devious reasons, and over the past few years, I've taken them and I've gotten sick. Whether it be natural disasters, supply chain issues, medical
Iced tea,
emergencies,
yes.
or the apocalypse, you can rest assured knowing you get antibiotics.
Not quite chilly enough to go straight coffee yet, but I already had a cup this morning. Cup of coffee and my AG1 for breakfast.
So if you want to be prepared for the unexpected, go to twc.health/JKReacts and order your kit today. While you're there, use the code JKReacts for 15% off.
And this dude can't stay on the road. Tar dripping, asphalt dripping out of the back of his truck. Sure as hell don't want to be behind him. Wonder why Russell doesn't have his little sidekick at the table anymore. He's been doing it from like a desk. Maybe the dude's on vacation. Just thought it was odd. Last couple days I've seen him. There's been some fire. Okay. YouTube just started, so it means. There we go.
Hello there, you awakening runners. Welcome to Stay Free with Russell Brand. Thank you so much for joining us. The first 15 minutes of the show will be available on YouTube and exclusively on Rumble. Today we're talking about, well, Nazis actually. What is a Nazi and what isn't a Nazi? Is a Nazi a member of the Nazi party being applauded in Canada? Are declared Nazis Nazis? Or are Nazis people that are just called Nazis for various reasons? Also, we're going to be talking to Dr. Robert Epstein about the phenomenal power of Google and their ability to manipulate the public sphere and conversation in ways that are just staggering. You're going to want to see that. And to start us off, we're going to be talking about just ordinary, typical corruption. Democrat US Senator Bob Menendez and his wife have been charged in a bribery inquiry through old school gold bullion, James Bond style villainous corruption. Let's have a look.
New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez and his wife indicted by a federal grand jury. The senator is accused of using his office to help several businessmen from New Jersey, as well as the Egyptian government, in exchange for receiving hundreds.
Does sound like a sort of 80s Bruce Willis film, the Egyptian government, business people from New Jersey. What's, I suppose, most troubling about this is that it's not surprising at all, is it? Don't you just expect people in Congress and the Senate to be taking bribes? Isn't it just understood at this point that this is their function? All we have here is a more overt and slightly more comical example of what is institutionalized institutionally true. I mean, how far along the gradient is this type of corruption from the ordinary donations and lobbying and ordinary framing of the political obligations of senators and Congress people everywhere, and our understanding that these people are not representatives of common interests or popular interests. They are simply in the service of elite establishment agenda. And when some gold bullion turns up, or a briefcase full of money, or an envelope full of dirty cash, it simply serves as a more poetic and easily understandable example of something we all know to be true anyway.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts, including cash, a luxury vehicle, even gold bars.
The gold bars was when they were running out of ways to bribe him. Here's some gifts, some cash, a luxury vehicle. How about actual just gold? There we go. Ow! Don't throw that thing, it's heavy. It's the kind of ridiculous, overt cartoon corruption that offers us a readable symptom of how the establishment operates. They claim moral authority, but actually this is what they're about. But in this instance, there is a plain distinction between what they claim to be and what they actually are. Look at them: suits, ties, dressed up, the rhetoric of politics, and behind the scenes, gold bars. No transparency, no clarity, evident and obvious corruption.
It accuses the senator of accepting cash and gifts, including, as you mentioned, gold bars, a luxury Mercedes-Benz vehicle, in exchange, and they call it bribery, for taking official action to benefit the people that were paying the money.
Yeah, know how bribery works. What you mean? You give me that gold bar, and then I say stuff in the Senate that's beneficial? You're a genius. I'm glad we got you on the team.
Separate arrangements. There was an Egyptian figure who had a halal meat business that got an exclusive deal to provide halal meat to the government of Egypt, even as Senator Menendez had significant influence over foreign U.S. militaries.
Do you know what I like? Halal meat. You guys should be eating more halal meat. Aren't we in the middle of a culture war against presumed Islamic interests? That's us, maybe. But you gotta try this halal to believe it. Look at how the legacy media take the opportunity to present this as a sort of outlier. This is somehow distinct from the kind of corruption that is actually institutional. I'll give you some examples of that in a moment.
Sales and military aid to Egypt. And the indictment details a series of allegations where they say Senator Menendez exerted that influence and pressured Egyptian officials even as he was helping this company. And then separately, it says that the senator intervened in two separate criminal matters involving his associates, trying to stop essentially the criminal investigations into those people in exchange for financial compensation in the form of bribes. And what's so shocking about this, Sana, is it's coming just 6 years after Senator Menendez narrowly escaped conviction in a separate and unrelated corruption case. There was a hung jury. The Justice Department decided not to retry him, and he was admonished by the Senate Ethics Committee for taking gifts and luxury items from a friend of his in exchange for official action.
You can't get enough, Nick, can he, old Menendez? He loves a bribe, plainly. But how is this significant case of overt, almost comedic bribery distinct from these examples of corruption that you would have to regard as institutional? From the world of energy, at least 100 members of Congress own fossil fuel stocks, of which 59 are Republicans and 41 are Democrats. So there you go. That's an example, I would say, of corruption that's accepted and legal. Pharma, of the $263 million that the pharmaceutical industry spent on lobbying in 2021, it gave 61% to the Democrat Party and 39% to the Republican Party. Again, a type of corruption and bias that is, in a sense, far more influential, impactful, and yet legal. Banking. In 22, commercial banks spent over $30 million lobbying Congress, 61% to the Republicans and 39% to the Democrats. Notice again how both wings of the parliamentary or congressional system are beholden to the same interests, meaning that whoever you vote for, you're voting for a party that is paid for by these types of interests, whether it's banking or big pharma or the military-industrial complex or the energy industry. Nearly 20% of Congress members, 49 Democrats and 44 Republicans, have been trading shares of companies in industries they are supposed to be overseeing as part of their committee assignments. Compared to that, Menendez just looks like a sort of old school corrupt, like mayor of Springfield type politician, rather than an institutionally corrupt and more invasive political operator. Defense. The Pentagon spent $14 trillion after 9/11. 55% of it went to for-profit defense contractors. That's one of the big ones, isn't it? It just shows how an entire nation is formulated around this type of corruption. Military contractors have spent $2.5 billion on lobbying over the past 2 decades. They split their checks more or less evenly between Democrat and Republican candidates. Soon after the Ukraine war broke out last year, Congress voted to appropriate $40 billion in aid to Ukraine. Every single Democrat voted for it. 40 Republicans urged Joe Biden to include a 5% increase in defense spending in his 2023 US budget. So this obvious example of corruption really just gives us an opportunity to look at institutional corruption. All dear old Bob Menendez really did a bit of atavistic, old school, nostalgic corruption instead of the more slick corruption that passes for ordinary government these days. In a way, what stories like this demonstrate is a lack of moral authority and integrity at the heart of our systems, whether they are media, state, institutional, governmental, judicial. We already know that's the case. And sometimes you get an obvious, glaring, and almost comedic example of that, like when a Nazi is honoured in the ultra-liberal and progressive, according to their own declarations, Canadian Parliament. Let's have a look at that in more detail and look at how the term Nazi is used to shut down dissent and debate when actual Nazism appears to be literally celebrated in Parliament. Here's the news? No, here's the effing news. The establishment and the legacy media are certain that there are Nazis and fascists everywhere, particularly when people oppose their agenda. But they're also willing to applaud and fund actual Nazis. Does this mean that we live in a truly nihilistic time with no truthful moral centre in any of our establishment institutions? Surely you have noticed that terms like Nazi and fascist are used profligately to describe anyone who opposes the agenda of the establishment. And yet we find curious contradictions when we look at the funding of the ongoing war. We find peculiar anomalies when an actual Nazi is applauded in Canadian Parliament when Zelensky recently visited. Does this mean that terms like Nazi and fascist have lost their tethering, have lost their root, have lost their grounding because we live in a kind of nihilistic time where language is used in order to create narratives that are beneficial and to shut down opposition? Are we able to have honest, moral conversations about righteousness and justice anymore anyway? Who has true moral authority? Who do we look to now to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is just and unjust? A few examples of this from recent times, of course, are the profligate and sometimes casual use of terms like Nazi and fascist, with establishment politicians willing to label their opponents as fascists and Nazis simply as a means to shut them down. Let's have a look at those terms now, because if you fund actual explicit Nazis in the ongoing war, that's not to say that the Ukrainian cause is not just, or that Ukrainians are more broadly Nazi. Of course it isn't. It's just a reference to the actual Nazi battalion that are funded as a result of this war and the complexities of this war. And let's have a look at this extraordinary incident where a real-life, genuine, actual swastika-wearing Nazi was applauded on the eve of Yom Kippur, and ask, where is moral authority now? And how are we all suffering as a result of the loss of this genuine moral centre?
I remember as a young student, trying to figure out how did people get basically drawn in by Hitler? How did that happen? And I'd watch newsreels and I'd see this guy standing up there ranting and raving and people shouting and raising their arms. I thought, what's happened to these people? Why did they believe that?
Well, some of them in Canada, being applauded in Parliament.
You saw the rally in Ohio the other night. Trump is there ranting and raving for more than an hour, and you have these rows of young men with their arms raised. I thought, what is going on?
Okay, so there's an obvious attempt to equate supporters of Trump with Nazis, a literal, apparent and observable attempt to do just that. Now put aside your own preferences for a moment and think about what the meaning of Nazism is in a contemporary context. Does it mean fascism? Does it mean genocidal policies? Does it mean racism? Certainly any Nazi worthy of the term would have to be racist and genocidal, I would say, as a bare minimum. How is it that this term continues to be used, and what is the function of this term? Is it simply to shut down conversation? Is it to delegitimize opposition? Because if the term Nazi can be applied indiscriminately, or at least conveniently, don't we have to look at Nazis that are declared explicit and obvious, and inconvenient Nazis that might be funded by the very establishment that are attempting to use that term to shut down conversation?
So there is a real pressure, and I think it is fair to say we're in a struggle between democracy and autocracy.
Now, of course, Hillary Clinton stands for a particular type of neoliberalist politics that ultimately supports the same financial interests that were ultimately in charge during the Bush-Cheney era, and yet uses the rhetoric of progressivism when it's convenient. Another political figure that is aligned with those ideals, but also, I would argue, and let me know in the chat and the comments if you agree, quite oppressive when it comes to protest and free speech. Take, for example, the Canadian trucker movement, is Justin Trudeau. I suppose what we're proposing here is there is the rhetoric of liberalism and freedom, and yet the behaviour of authoritarianism. Certainly we're not accusing people that we disagree with ideologically of being Nazis, because that is the kind of simplistic, reductive discourse that we need to move beyond. What we're pointing out is there doesn't seem to be any moral centre in any of our establishment institutions, whether that's the media, the government, the corporate world, or the judiciary, that allows us to freely trust their moral position. That's why you have people that support their opponents dismissed as Nazis, and actual Nazis, as in this clip, applauded in Parliament. Not to mention the complexity that we referred to earlier, where the Azov battalion continue to be funded by your taxpayer dollars. So what is a Nazi really?
A standing ovation for a Ukrainian veteran of the Second World War who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
In a sense, the mathematics, geography and history could have been looked at before the decision to honour that gentleman, who may well have been brave, but it has to be said, was a brave Nazi. And suddenly we're in some very complex moral territory. In an attempt to assume righteous posturing, Nazis are being applauded. Opponents are being shut down for being Nazis. I mean, this is Canada, where the trucker movement were dismissed as Nazis, shut down, their free speech was controlled because they were alleged to be Nazis for no real actual reason, and yet a member of the Nazi party has just been celebrated in Parliament. Now, obviously, this was an error and a mistake, but what it shows me, and I wonder if you agree with this, is there is no actual tethering to values and principles anymore. Language is just used, adjudications are used in order to meet a particular agenda, to control the public sphere, to shut down dissent and opposition. This person is a Nazi, that person's a Nazi, but what about these Nazis? We're funding those Nazis. What about this Nazi? We're applauding that Nazi. What this shows me is there's a kind of nihilism at the core of our culture. Our institutions are falling apart from the inside, observably. And this kind of peculiar moral morass is the observable symptom of a system that has no moral core.
Invited by House Speaker Anthony Rota to witness Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's address to Parliament, Yaroslav Bunka is one of his constituents. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service.
Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, a Nazi hero. The world's getting so complicated. Plainly, this is a ridiculous error, but it's also a window into the hollow, empty rhetoric that passes for politics these days. And this is what happens when nothing means anything anymore, when there's a locked-on agenda that has to be pursued, and justice can be discarded, meaning can be discarded, rights can be discarded, free speech can be discarded. Suddenly it's plausible that bank accounts can be shut down, people's financial lives, private lives can all be used as pieces on a chessboard that always has the same momentum. Centralized authority, shut down debate. That's why you'll notice that any crisis or trauma that's tossed into the machine, whether it's a climate crisis, a health crisis, or an energy crisis, a military crisis, always has the same result: the empowerment and enrichment of an elite and the disempowerment of ordinary people. This paradigm will be repeated endlessly, I predict, until none of us have any power at all.
That was the jubilant scene Friday. Now new details have emerged about that war service MPs applauded. Bunka served in the 1st Galician Division,
a voluntary unit commanded by the Nazis.
The unit is complicit in the Holocaust.
This Jewish human rights campaigner says there's no defending former soldiers like Hunka.
You swore allegiance to Hitler, and you were involved with the massacre of civilians.
Rhoda has now apologized and says he regrets ever inviting him.
In retrospect, I shouldn't have invited a Nazi on Yom Kippur. I'm afraid I was very drunk. It seems, I suppose, insensitive is the word. Does that word have any meaning anymore? Does anything mean anything anymore?
I recognize an individual in the gallery. I have subsequently become aware of more information which causes me to regret my decision to do so, he says in a statement. I accept full responsibility for my actions. Still, the opposition is asking how this could happen.
How it happens is no one has any regard for actual values. People care only for spectacle. Just the creation of a spectacle, the creation of some symbols, as long as it's generally moving in the direction of their agenda, they won't question the reality of it. That's how it happens, because there's no earthed connection to reality. This is the cultural space that's being created. This is the cultural space that's being controlled.
The Prime Minister's office says it wasn't aware the speaker had invited Hunka, saying in a statement, no advance notice was provided to the Prime Minister's office, nor the Ukrainian delegation, about the invitation or the recognition.
And yet they applauded anyway, because they don't have any genuine values. They don't care for the actual truth. They just want to participate in a disempowering spectacle.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting that this happened. The speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and, by extension, to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country are commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation.
What? Russian propaganda? Russian disinformation? Didn't you just have a Nazi in Parliament and applaud it? Are you suggesting that somehow Putin was involved in that? You don't have to be a Putin apologist, and I'm certainly not one, to recognise that this event is not the fault of Vladimir Putin. This is the fault of a morally empty neoliberal establishment that will use symbols to create a narrative without questioning what they're actually doing, because there's no meaning there. There is no meaning there. Just the service of elite interests and the provision of an apparently convenient narrative that, because it's so hollow and vacuous, will occasionally involve applauding Nazis on the eve of Yom Kippur, because they've got no actual values.
We continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine, as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
Well, as long as the unequivocal support of Ukraine doesn't similarly involve the support of actual Nazis. And again, you don't have to not be supportive of Ukrainian people, sympathetic to their plight.
What's the difference between a legal war and an illegal war?
An unnecessary war, to still be able to observe that there is a Nazi battalion being funded by your taxpayer dollars fighting within the Ukrainian army. There is a degree of complexity and nuance which is way beyond the ability of this current system to navigate. Liberals, socialists and other progressives often claim that conservatives are in bed with the far right and Nazis. This repulsive term is sometimes used to describe conservatives themselves. Well, that's just not going to work anymore. The political left can thank Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Liberals for this after they unwittingly honoured a Nazi in Parliament. What an astonishing time it is. This story just one of the indications of how crazy the world has become. Now, obviously, we can't bring you this evidently contentious content without support from our sponsors. That's why I'm incredibly grateful that Sticker Mule, one of the great sponsors of Stay Free with Russell brand, are offering these 6 stunning designs. They're only available in this pack. They're all made with Sticker Mule's magic touch. Sticker Mule has 10,000 of these packs. That's right, 10,000 ready to deliver to your address absolutely free. Just go to stickermule.com/Russell and fill out the form. Thank you, Sticker Mule, for continuing to support our content in an extraordinary time. And thank you, Canada, for being so extraordinary in the people you're willing to honour. Let's get back into that. Anthony Rota, the Speaker of the House, recognised one of his constituents, 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka, who was honoured during Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's September the 22nd visit. This is because politics is a spectacle now. They realise there's a Ukrainian veteran living in our constituency. Wouldn't it be fantastic to honour this Ukrainian veteran because it will look good and it will feel good, but it won't mean anything except applauding, in this instance, a Nazi. And unless you want to get into the complexity of war, the nature of good and evil, Solzhenitsyn's term that a line between good and evil runs not between nations, continents, races or creeds, but through every human heart, then that looks like an error. And I don't see any willingness to look at Solzhenitsyn's writing work because he's Russian. Rota depicted Hunka as a Ukrainian-Canadian war veteran from the Second World War who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians, and also called him a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we all thank him for his service. I mean, that's actually a considerable lack of knowledge of the Second World War, where it's commonly understood that Russia, the United States, Britain, and others were in alliance against the Nazis. Here's the problem. Hunka served in a unit which was renamed the 1st Ukrainian Division towards the end of the Second World War. That particular division is more well known under its previous names as either the SS Galicia Division or the 14th Waffen Grenadier SS Division. It was a voluntary unit that was under the command of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany and was accused of murdering innocent Jews and Poles. So it's sort of pretty frontline actual Nazism. This is not the kind of Nazism that is used linguistically to condemn opponents of neoliberalist vacuous politics. This is actual execution of innocent people on the basis of their nationality or race. Hunka received a standing ovation in the House. It's on the record. It will always be available on YouTube and other video clips. There's no way for the Trudeau Liberals to ever escape it. Rota and his staff clearly had no idea there was a link between the 1st Ukrainian Division and the Nazis before inviting Hunka. Presumably, or they wouldn't have invited him because PR is their business, honesty and politics isn't. Government House leader Karina Gould also made this post on X on September the 24th. The Speaker has made it clear that he was responsible for inviting this individual to the House. The government played no role. It did not know he would be there. The PM did not meet him. I'm deeply troubled this happened. I urge MPs to avoid politicising this incident. You can't start politicising the Nazis. They were a political organisation. In a sense, they were just hobbyists, really. You shouldn't drag them into the quagmire of the current divisive political debate. And again, what you see is an establishment that cares only about spectacle, not about reality, that has to shut down dissent, that has to use derogatory language and condemnatory terms, because there is no centre, there are no values at their core. The same way that they would willingly use a Nazi, they would use other terms for other minority groups and other oppressed groups to leverage and advance other arguments, I believe, in order to cause division and hatred and to mask the fact that there is no ethical centre to any of their actions, because they are simply shepherding us towards a globalist, centralised, authoritarian dystopia. And if you want to look at some of our other videos, I've got the receipts for that statement. Here's another fact. A war monument dedicated to the 1st Ukrainian Division was defaced in the St. Volodymyr Ukrainian Cemetery in Oakville, Ontario in July 2020. It was originally treated as a hate-motivated incident by police. Jewish groups and human rights advocates were furious, as they are today with the Hunka revelation. The international media covered it from end to end, yet no liberal media made the connection to this Nazi-aligned volunteer unit that was in the news only 3 years ago. I suppose that's because of their certainty in their moral position and a lack of true inquiry and journalistic integrity, and a desire simply to push a particular agenda, even when that agenda has inconvenient Nazis in it. Here's yet another fact. The Canadian government's blunder played right into the waiting hands of Vladimir Putin and Russia. Such sloppiness of memory is outrageous, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters. Many Western countries, including Canada, have raised a young generation that does not know who fought whom or what happened during the Second World War, and they know nothing about the threat of fascism. In a sense, this abandonment of history, this abandonment of the memory that there was an alliance between Russia, the United States, the UK, and many other countries that stood against Nazism before ideological fissures appeared, is also an obscuring, I believe, the possibility that peaceful, diplomatic solutions to the current conflict could be reached. That Russia aren't alien and Nazi, in spite of the obvious atrocities associated with Stalinism. It seems that there's a possibility that they are a nation with their own trajectory, their own agenda, even possibly their own imperialism and colonialism. But to imagine that the neoliberal establishment of the United States of America, in particular, doesn't have a comparable agenda is especially naive. And it's why use of terms like Nazis and the shutting down of conversation and the closing down of dissent and the convenient appropriation of symbols, the conversations like this are able to be continually avoided when they're the very conversations that are required. To further present the complexity of using a term like Nazi when Nazism continues to be a real thing in the world, here's a few headlines. The Guardian: Azov fighters Ukraine's greatest weapon. The Azov causes particular concern due to the far-right, even neo-Nazi leanings of many of its members. NBC News: Ukraine's Nazi problem is real. Neo-Nazis are part of some of Ukraine's growing ranks of volunteer battalions. One is the Azov battalion. I mention that not to discredit Ukrainian people, not to discredit the right of Ukrainian people to warrant support, but in order to point out that there is a degree of complexity that is seldom handled by mainstream media and establishment politics.
Don't drug.
Complexity. They're interested in propaganda. Anyone that is interested in complexity is likely to be regarded as a dissenter, a Nazi, or worse, and shut down because they have no moral authority at their centre. You know that they operate at the service of establishment interests and that their ideological rhetoric is just scattered across the cultural space to cause distraction, infraction, friction, or conflict because there is no sense of righteousness. There is no sense of justice. There is no sense of beauty, truth, God. There is no vision for a better future at the core of this establishment. Only manage decline, only manage discontent, only blame and condemnation. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the chat. See you in a second. What extraordinary times we're living in, where reality appears to be curated to an enormous degree. How do you manage reality? How do you manage perception? How do you manage information? Joining me now is Dr. Robert Epstein, a former Harvard psychology professor, author of 50 books, and current director of the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology. Thank you very much for joining us today, Doctor.
My pleasure.
One of the claims that you have made that is most astonishing, difficult almost to believe, is that Google are essentially able to curate and control reality. Google, that we all use, is an ordinary tool in most people's lives. You claim can be used to drive and direct an agenda, that it can be used as a political tool and even weapon. In particular, I'd like to ask you about the claim that Google was able to direct 6 million extra votes to Joe Biden. And obviously that's an incredibly contentious claim because talking about electoral fraud and electoral meddling seems to be one of the subjects that's most difficult to discuss, and has to be discussed with incredible caution. So can you tell me exactly what it is you mean by Google directing 6 million extra votes to your preferred presidential candidate, and how on earth Google will be able to do that?
Well, I've been doing very rigorous scientific research on this topic for more than 11 years. And what should really shock you here is that people's preoccupation with election fraud and ballot stuffing and all that, that preoccupation, that obsession is actually engineered by Google and to a lesser extent other tech companies. There's nothing really there, and that's what they do. They redirect attention like magicians do so that you won't look at them. That's exactly what they're doing. So they're directing us to look at things that are very trivial, that are competitive, that have little net effect on elections, because they don't want you looking at them, because they, in fact, have the power and use the power to shift millions of votes in elections, not just in the US election in 2020, where they did indeed shift more than 6 million votes to Joe Biden, but in elections around the world. By the year 2015, Google alone was determining the outcomes of upwards of 25% of the national elections in the world. How do we know this? Well, in 2020, for example, we had 1,735 field agents in 4 swing states in the US. That's where the action is. What does that mean? That means that we had recruited registered voters, equipped them with special software, so that we could look over their shoulders as they're getting content from Google and other tech companies. And we recorded all that content. In other words, we were seeing the real content that they're sending to real voters during the days leading up to an election. And then we measured the bias in that content. We found extreme political bias favoring Joe Biden, whom I actually supported, although I no longer do. the point is we found extreme political bias, and we know from randomized controlled experiments we've been conducting since 2013 that level of bias shifted at least 6 million votes to Biden in that election. In 2022, we had 2,742 field agents in 10 swing states. So in other words, we're monitoring real content sent to real voters by these companies, recording it in real time and analyzing it in real time. In 2022, they shifted millions of votes in hundreds of midterm elections throughout the US. We know they did this for Brexit, by the way, in the UK. And again, they're very good at redirecting attention. What we're doing now is much, much bigger. We decided to build a permanent monitoring system in all 50 US states. At this moment in time, we have 11,638 field agents in all 50 states, which means 24 hours a day we are monitoring and preserving and archiving ephemeral content. That's what they use to manipulate us. Ephemeral content through the computers of more than 11,000 registered voters in the US, 24 hours a day. We're on the verge of setting up a permanent system like this that will keep these companies away from our elections and from our kids permanently.
Whilst I understand that you're able, with these agents that you described, to monitor the information that Google is publishing, promoting, and directing, it does seem to be, given the sort of literally global scale of the endeavor that Google are undertaking, to be a relatively small sample size. I will add, of course, that I understand that there are significant contracts that are explicit between Google and the government in areas like data, security, military-industrial complex, defense. There are, explicit financial ties, as well as donations and lobbying money, as well as numerous people in Congress and the Senate owning significant shares in companies, big tech companies, particularly in this instance, that they're supposed to regulate. So the possibility and opportunity for corruption is plainly there. But I do wonder how you're able, with that sample size, to deduce such a significant number, specifically 6 million. And also the other figure that I've heard in association with your work, that a 50-50 split among undecided voters, I know we're talking about swing states anyway, can turn into a 90-10 split. How do you map these relatively small figures onto such a global number? And also, you suggested that part of your work going forward is to regulate and oppose this trend and tendency. How would you do that?
You're shocking me here because you sound skeptical, and yet you have been victimized by exactly these kinds of manipulations and are being victimized now. You've been victimized because you have been suppressed. Your content has been suppressed. You've been demonetized. These companies have enormous power to determine what people see and what people don't see. And what we measure in our experiments is how that impacts people's opinions and people's votes, their voting preferences. That's what we measure in controlled experiments. We present at scientific meetings. We publish in peer-reviewed journals. Our work follows the very highest standards of scientific integrity. And this issue of sample size, you've got that backwards. These are enormous sample sizes for statistical and analytical purposes. These are very, very large samples. And so the effects that we keep replicating over and over again, other teams have now replicated, those are significant. For those of you who know any stats here, at the 0.001 level, meaning the probability that we're making mistakes is less than 1 in 1,000. We're highly confident about what we've been finding. And the problem here is that we're up against the most powerful mind control machine that's ever been developed by humankind. And it's operating in every country in the world except mainland China. And it impacts, how people see those companies. They're impacting not just our elections. They're not just indoctrinating our kids. They're literally altering the way we perceive them as a company. And that's extremely dangerous. And most of these manipulations that they have access to now, that they control exclusively because they're a monopoly, most of these manipulations cannot be seen by the people who are being manipulated. That makes it even more dangerous.
So your ability to observe them and to track them, it operates against what type
Later
of
on,
control?
Doctor,
If you're able to say
enjoy your lunch.
that people are being sent this information that's highly biased, what would unbiased information look like? I'm open, of course, to the possibility that this unprecedented and fully immersive technology would be used by people that have an appetite to control information, and it seems quite plain to me that that does happen. But because it's so extraordinary and revelatory, because it's so significant, and if it were able to be opposed, could be so seismic in our ability to have true democracy and a public sphere worthy of the name, where dissent and conversation could take place freely, I feel that it's important that I understand exactly how that, not exactly because of probably the limitations of my ability to understand, but as precisely as I might, the way that you're able to say, look, this would constitute neutral information. Look at what you're actually getting, because I feel that it's very important.
Again, you're shocking me because you're being the skeptic here, but you know, good scientists are also skeptics, and there's no one more skeptical about the research I do than me. So let me give you an example, and I'll just show you exactly how this works. In 2020, where we had collected a massive amount of data, we had preserved more than 1.5 million ephemeral experiences on Google and other platforms. And you're asking, ephemeral experiences? What are those? Those are those fleeting experiences that we all have online when we're shown search suggestions or answer boxes or search results or news feeds. They appear, they impact you, they disappear, they're stored nowhere. So no one can go back in time and see what would.
All right, guys. Peace. I'll see you later.